Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Hello Alice, and today I am going to be teaching you guys some basic watercolor brush strokes. So if that's something you want to learn, then just keep on watching. So first of all, this is going to be part of my Watercolor 101 series. If you haven't ever watched any of my previous Watercolor 101 videos, I definitely recommend checking them out. I'll link them down below in the description box. I have videos that are going to help you figure out what kind of paper to use, what kind of paints to use, what kind of brushes are best, all of that great stuff so that you can get started with your watercolor journey. So today we're going to be talking about those basic brush techniques, and these are basically the building blocks, foundations of watercolor that you can use in all of your paintings. They're really useful, the basic things to know. So before I go into those, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to be using today. I am going to be painting on the B watercolor paper. This is cold press, so it has a little bit of a texture to it, but it's not as textured as rough paper. I do have some paper towel next to me. This is very important. I'm going to be using two Van Gogh paints just for showing you how the techniques work. I'm going to be using Cerulean Blue and Permanent Blue Violet. So those are going to be the paints that we're going to be using. And then I have two brushes. I'm going to have a flat wash brush right here by Princeton Art and Brush Company, and I'm going to be using a round by Black Velvet, and this is a number 4 brush. So the basic techniques that I'm going to be teaching you are a flat wash, a gradiated wash. I'm also going to show you an example of a bad wash. Then I'm going to show you wet on wet, wet on dry, and dry brush techniques. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go straight in with a flat wash. So you can do a wash with a variety of brushes. You can use round brushes if you want, but I prefer to use a wash brush. This is what a wash brush looks like. They're generally flat. They hold a decent amount of water. This is a 1/2 size. That stands for 1/2 inch, I believe. And then I also have a larger one, which is 5/8, and an even larger, rather distorted one, which looks like this. You can also use mop brushes. This is a mop brush. As you can see, it's not as square in shape, and it's fluffier. But for this tutorial, we're going to be using a flat wash. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the Van Gogh in Cerulean. Now, an important thing about washes is the amount of paint to water ratio that you have. So you want to make sure that you have about 30 to 50% paint to the water ratio. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mix up two different pools of paint. One is going to be for a bad wash and the other one is going to be for the flat wash. So here are our two pools of paint. As you can see, this one has significantly more water than this one, and what's going to happen is when we try to create a wash with this puddle of paint, we're going to get a lot of cabbaging. We're going to get a lot of inconsistent color, inconsistent texture, and the reason for that is the more water that you have in comparison to your pigment, the water will push the pigment out and away. So I'm going to go ahead and paint a wash with this more watered down paint puddle, and you all will see what I mean. Okay, so we're going to take our wash brush and some of this rather watery paint, and we're just going to go ahead and paint a wash in the square that says bad wash. And I will show you guys what happens. As you can see, there is quite a bit of water in this wash. You can already start to see the pigment separating from the water and puddling up in the corners. I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, then I'll come back in a few minutes and you all can see what it looks like when it's dry. Okay, so this is dry. I did cheat a little bit and use a hairdryer just for speed. That's why we've got this dude right here. But as you can see, this has dried with quite a bit of texture and it's quite uneven. So that's not great. That's not something we really want. It can be a cool effect if that's what you're looking for, but for a flat wash, this really isn't what we're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do this the correct way. Okay, so unfortunately my camera stopped filming right as I did this first line of the flat wash. So we're going to continue the wash just a little bit below, since unfortunately this has dried too much for me to continue with the wash. So we're just going to ignore this part right here, and we're going to go ahead and take that thicker mixture of paint. I do have this little bit of paper towel, so I can just tap it off if I feel like I have too much. And you're going to start at the edge or in the corner. As you can see, I started in the corner up here. And you're going to drag the paint across the box or area that you're painting in as smooth of a movement as you can. You're going to reload up your brush. If you feel like you have too much, just tap a little off. Then you're going to go down right below it, and you're going to make sure to overlap with the line above it. Now this part is really important that you overlap. That's going to pull that wet paint down into the next line and give you a nice smooth wash of color. Then going back down again, I didn't feel like I needed to get more paint on my brush, but if you did feel like you needed to, then go ahead. And then your last line, just keeping everything smooth and even. All right. So as you can see, this is already looking a lot better than the bad wash. There are a couple areas where we're seeing puddling, however, and there's a couple ways to fix this. So the first is to take your brush and to dry it off on that paper towel and just gently touch your brush to that area of puddling. It'll soak up the excess paint and fix that problem. The second thing is using paper towel, and you just want to take a corner of your paper towel and you want to lightly touch it to the puddled area, just ever so lightly. And the corner of the paper towel will wick up the excess paint, leaving you with a nice flat wash. The reason you don't want these puddles is because they'll collect and then the paint will dry darker and ruin your even wash of color. So that is how you do a flat wash. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show you is a gradiated wash or a graded wash, whatever you want to call it. There's multiple ways to do it. I'm showing you this on a small bit of paper because I didn't show it in the best technique on the other piece of paper, so I want to show you again. So you're going to go ahead and take that same mixture and start out the same way as before. So going from left to right on your paper. There are multiple ways to do a graded wash. This is just kind of how I do it. So what I tend to do is just dab off a little bit of that paint, get a little bit of water, basically diluting that color down, and then going further down in that second row, dab off a little paint, get a little bit of water, paint underneath it again, dab off a little paint, get a little water, bring that down again, and bring that down for a final time. And you can go ahead with your dry brush and clean up any puddles. There are other ways to do this. You can create like a bead and push water down. This is just how I have created gradients in the past. So whatever works best for you. So as you can see, we have a nice little gradient right there, going from a darker blue to a lighter blue. And yeah, that's how you create a graded or gradient wash. The next technique that I'm going to be focusing on is a really fun technique that can be used to create loads of different textures in your paintings. It's a very versatile technique, and it's called wet on wet, which incidentally enough involves putting wet paint onto wet paint. We're very creative with our naming over here in the watercolor community. So I'm going to be using two different colors of paint this time. I'm going to be using that previous blue paint, and then I'm currently mixing up some of that purple, and I'm going to be using about the same ratios as before. You don't want too much water because, as I said before, the water will push the paint out, and then you'll get water splotches, which can be a very cool technique, but it's not what we're going for in this video. So an important thing to remember about watercolor paint is the paint will go where the water is. So if you're painting on wet paper, the paint will spread out. If you're painting on dry paper, the paint will generally stay where you put it. So we're gonna go ahead and throw in a really quick kind of sloppy wash here of that cerulean blue. Now for the fun part, we're going to go in with that purple and we're just going to start placing it. Now as you can see, the wetter the paper is, the more it spreads out. So you can really just play with it, have fun, and it will spread out. You can create really beautiful gradients this way. There's loads of really fun stuff that you can do with a wet on wet technique, and it creates some beautiful effects. And that's how you do the wet on wet technique. Very simple. Moving on from wet on wet, I'm gonna go to the most basic technique I'm gonna be teaching you, and that is wet on dry, which is exactly what it sounds like. Wet paint on dry paper or on dry paint. This is your most basic technique. It's going to be what you use to block almost everything in. It's how I personally do a lot of my shading. It's a really, really useful and helpful thing to know. So as I mentioned previously, watercolor paint goes where the water is. So if your paper is dry, it will stay for the most part where you put it. So you basically just go in with your paint and paint on dry paper. Very exciting. Now the cool thing is that once you've painted this, it's gonna stay where you put it for the most part, so you can kind of go in with that purple if you want and do a little bit of wet on wet inside that, and it will stay within the lines. It's not gonna go off onto the dry paper unless you put it there. There is one exception to this rule, and that is if you damage the fibers of your paper. The fibers of your paper can be damaged through erasing too hard or using pencil or graphite too hard. So that's why it's always recommended to draw on a separate piece of paper and then transfer that drawing to watercolor paper and very lightly erase it. Kneadable erasers are really great for watercolor because you can press them on and pull them up, and it really doesn't damage the fibers as much as rubbing vigorously with a regular eraser does. If you damage the fibers, then a lot of times the paint can want to seep into the texture of that damaged area, and you can get strange little occurrences when that happens. As I mentioned before, you can also use this technique to paint on top of dry paint. You want to make sure your paint is bone dry. Like I said, the paint will go where the water is, so you want to make sure there's absolutely no water left, and then you can paint over the top. You can use this to add shading, to create really cool effects. As you can see, watercolor is translucent. It is not meant to be opaque. Your watercolor should not be opaque. If you want an opaque medium, acrylic or gouache are great alternatives. So as you can see, we've painted over the top of this blue little squiggly line, and you can kind of see it pulling through. You can also use the same paint on top to build up opacity and create almost a shading-like effect. That's just that same blue that we used before. Now, you can encounter some problems painting over dry paint. Depending on the paint that you're using and the paper that you're using and the water concentration, you can accidentally lift up the paint that's underneath. Now, lifting is basically when you use water and you pull up part of the paint. So I'm going to give you guys a little example with just a clean brush with some water. And I will be going over this in another tutorial because this is a technique that can be used purposefully. But for now, I'm just going to show you a quick example. As you can see, I've lifted up where the paint is right here, and it's a much lighter color. Now, you can accidentally do this if your paint has too much water in it. It can easily lift it up, or if your paper is what's called hard-sized. Sizing is something that's put on the paper so that it doesn't absorb all the paint, and if the paper is more hard-sized, then it's more prone to lifting, which can be a really good thing for some artists. But if you paint in the way that I do, where you use a lot of layers on top of one another, that can be hard for you. So I personally prefer more softer sized paper. You can go ahead and check out my Watercolor 101 papers video if you want some of my recommendations on papers that I personally like. So that's just something that you want to watch out for when using wet on dry technique. So the last technique that we're going to be talking about is a really fun technique, and it's what's called dry brush. And when you're going to be doing dry brush, the type of paper that you're using is going to be important. This is not something that you can do with hot press paper. Hot press paper is very, very smooth with very little texture, and dry brush relies on the texture of your paper to create its effect. So you want to make sure you're using either a cold press or a rough paper when you're doing a dry brush technique. So dry brush is also aptly named. You are using a dry brush. Well, not fully dry, but quite dry. So I'm going to go into this purple color that we used before and load up my brush. Now, in all the other instances, we've gone straight in, and that's not what we want to do today. We want to get off a lot of that color. So we're going to really tap it onto my paper towel and really soak up some of that color. And then we're going to roughly sweep it across the paper. You want to make sure you're holding your brush horizontally to the paper. So you're not using the tip of the brush here, you're using the side of the brush. And I let the brush dry for too long, so let's try that again. And as you can see, we're getting a really nice texture here. It's picking up on the rough texture in the paper and just highlighting the top portions, and it's not sinking in to the divots. This is a really useful technique. It can be used very effectively in foliage. It can also be used really effectively in water. It is one of my favorite techniques for painting water, especially the oceans, because, I mean, imagine if this was blue, you can sort of see the white is where the light is shining on it. So this is a really, really great technique for water. And that is how you do the dry brush technique. Okay, so that is the end of the video. Woohoo! Let me know if you guys liked it. Let me know if you were happy that Watercolor 101 is finally back on my channel. Whoop whoop! If you did like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Make sure to click that bell. It'll give you little notifications every time I upload. I do upload every single Friday. So if you liked what you saw here and you want to subscribe, that would be great, and it would make my heart happy. Otherwise, I hope this tutorial was helpful to you. Let me know what you thought of it down in the comments below. Don't forget to check out the rest of the Watercolor 101 series, and as always, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye guys!